In this video, I would like to talk about something that is overlooked and how it contributed to the latest Russian victory, the capture of Vuhledar. But what is this usually overlooked feature? Is this feature the so-called meat-wave assault tactic? Of course not, hence everyone talks about this, even it is a totally false picture. The Russian military does not launch meat-wave assaults since the end of the battle for Bakhmut. It is true, the Russian army is not capable of organizing offensive operations larger than a battalion. It is a serious problem of them, of which I will talk about in a later video. Is this tactic the bomb? Of course not, and it has multiple reasons. Both the mainstream media and politicians talk about nuclear weapons more often than it would be comfortable. However, in an ideal world, the only information about the nuclear weapons would be that the Russians' nuclear posture is practically unchanged since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The other reason is that, in spite of that there are tactical nuclear weapons, a nuclear strike always has strategic consequences, therefore the topic of nuclear weapons is far from the tactical level. The Russian strategic aerial campaign is also not the topic of this video, however it has devastating effect on the Ukrainian economy. What you will see and hear today is the offensive procedure of changing the center of gravity of the offensive. This usually overlooked feature of the Russian army has its roots in the theoretics of a Prussian general named Karl von Clausewitz. The definition of Schwerpunkt, or in English, the center of gravity of the operations, is closely related to one of the greatest military theoretics of Europe. It is not a surprise that the Russians rely on classical theoretics. The Russian military science is still intact and it is still functioning pretty well in spite of the tragic events of their aggression against Ukraine. Even the former Ukrainian Chief of General Staff, General Zaluzhny, said that the real military science is Russian. The Russian military science has its roots in the 18th century positivist scientific viewpoint. According to the fundamentals of this and the Russian military science, the world can be discovered and explained. Everything is defined by the principle of nature, which can be described in the language of mathematics. Before we go further in the topic, it is very important to clarify some definitions. First of all, three levels of military activities. The lowest level is the tactical level. According to the old proverb, tactical level is defined by the range of artillery guns. It is almost true today. We are talking about tactical level operations up to 4 or 5 kilometers deep and wide and up to the battalion level. Tactical level operations define the outcome of a battle. At the operational level, we will find brigades, divisions, and army corps. Operational level military activities happen in the depth and width of 1 to 3 dozens of kilometers. Usually we consider a single battle for an operational level activity. This battle does not define the outcome of the war, but it can influence the outcome of the campaign. At the strategic level, there are armies and army groups. Strategic level military activities, rather usually campaigns, define the outcome of the war, hence they cover the area of hundreds of kilometers. The other topic needs some clarification is the division of the area of operations. The area of operations is divided into concentric layers, among which the smallest is the area of responsibility. The area of responsibility is clearly defined in 4 dimensions, the 3Ds plus time. The area of responsibility is always clearly defined by the superior to the commander, and the commander is responsible for everything inside this area of responsibility. As the saying goes, the commander is responsible for everything he had done or failed to do. In the area of responsibility, the commander and his units can and will execute operations. By doing so, the unit has an influence of its surroundings, for example, adjacent units, and enemy adjacent units. This range of their influence is called, surprise, surprise, the area of influence. The area on which the unit does not have an influence, but if anything happens there, it influences the unit itself, is called the area of interest. Hence, the unit may be interested about the events in this area because it may have an effect of its operations. Well, after these two important topics, the division of the area of operations and the three levels of military activities have been clarified, let's talk about the actual events. In this rough map, you can see the approximate operational situation near Vuhledar on the 6th of August. All the sector boundaries are my deductions, hence the actual battle maps are of course not available. I have deducted them based on the average width of each unit's area of responsibility and the actual terrain features. At the Ukrainian side, the responsible formation was the Tavria operational grouping. It had 4 brigades worth of forces under its command in this sector, but the two most important units were the 79th Air Assault Brigade defending Konstantinivka and the 72nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade defending Vuhledar. The lines between these units were filled with territorial defense infantry units with debatable combat effectiveness, questionable leadership, and stuttering logistics. Facing them were the forces of the Russian South Operational Grouping's two formations, the 8th and 29th Combined Arms Armies, altogether with approximately 13 brigades worth of forces. Now let's have a closer look to the commencement of the final stage of the battle for Vuhledar. In order to understand the Russian method of attack of changing the center of gravity, let us examine a bit closer the area of responsibility of the 1472nd Motor Rifle Regiment, which is marked by the orange box. As I mentioned above, within this area the commander is responsible for everything he had done or failed to do. I have intentionally drawn the line further behind the Ukrainian first line of own troops, hence the Russians were on the attack. And I have also intentionally drew the line up until Vodjane, as it was the further objective of the Russian offensive operations. The area of influence, marked with the green line, is a bit of a complicated story. As its name suggests, the area of influence covers the territories that are affected by the unit's operations. In this case, the 1472nd Motorized Rifle Regiment's task was to attack towards Vodjane. This operation affected the adjacent units of the defending Ukrainian 233rd Infantry Battalion. The eventual success of this Russian attack affects the 72nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade in Vuhledar because its adjacent unit, the 68th Separate Infantry Battalion, has to protect its left flank. The eventual success of the Russian attack also influences the 79th Air Assault Brigade defending Konstantinivka, hence its right flank has to be reinforced. The area of interest, marked with the purple line, is also not a firm thing. This area of interest covers all the ground on which anything happens is important to know about, because it affects the own unit's operations. In this case, the 1472nd Motor Rifle Regiment has the task to attack towards Vodjane as we know. If the Russians or the Ukrainian forces do anything inside the purple lines, it influences the regiment's operations. However, if these activities are between the green and purple lines, the unit cannot do anything actively in order to mitigate the negative effects of the other unit's operations. The only thing the regiment can do is to prepare its staff to constantly gather information from this area between the green and purple lines and to set up a list of criteria by which they can decide whether to react to this event or just report it or to disregard it. Of course, most of this information is not gathered by the regiment itself, but the 2 echelons higher formation, the 8th Combined Arms Army. In the Russian army, it is not usual to distribute a lot of information because it does not fit into their order-centric style of command. On the 6th of August, at the perimeter of the 1472nd Motorized Rifle Regiment's area of influence, the 139th Assault Brigade in the southern flank and the 39th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade in the northern flank executed two small-scale platoon-sized attacks and captured the tree lines nearest to their actual positions. On the 7th of August, right after the previous day's attacks, the 1472nd Motor Rifle Regiment commenced its own operation and captured its immediate objective, advanced approximately a 1 by 1 kilometer area. According to the still effective field manuals, this area is almost a company's battle position. However, I am sure that in this case it was defended only by a Ukrainian platoon. This argument of mine is supported by the lack of Ukrainian troops, the enhanced capacities of observation and fires, the flat terrain, and the necessity to disperse the troops caused by the overwhelming Russian fire superiority. In the next week, thanks to the surprise effect of the Ukrainian Kursk offensive, the Russians did not commence any attacks until the 12th of August. In this operation, after brutal firefights and losing almost a battalion, the Russians gained a foothold in Konstantinivka. It is very important because this small town is an anchor of the Ukrainian southern defenses, and as such, it affected the Ukrainian force management. I mean, this town is important to be defended, therefore all the available reinforcements, artillery shells, extra drones, extra supplies were diverted to the area of responsibility of the 79th Air Assault Brigade. After drawing all the Ukrainian attention to the north by the tactical level success in Konstantinivka, it was time to shift the center of gravity of the attack. The green line represents the area of influence of the previous attack on Konstantinivka. The Russians did not want to fully capture the town, and they had two very good reasons for it. First, they suffered at least a battalion worth of losses. Second, is that now that the Ukrainians had boosted their defenses here, it would have cost them even more. So it was the perfect time to shift the center of gravity to the perimeter of the area of influence of the previous operation. They chose well, because this junction, marked as Objective Juliet, is perfectly well placed between mine number 1, the direction of Vuhledar, and mine number 3, the direction of Vodjane. By going for Objective Juliet has put the Ukrainian defense into an imbalance at the operational level. Hence, after Konstantinivka, they had to reconcentrate their resources to the south. And it also caused an imbalance at the tactical level, because after the eventual capture of Objective Juliet, the Ukrainian 68th Separate Infantry Battalion and its adjacent units could not be certain in which direction the Russians will continue to push, because both directions made sense. The Russian 139th Assault Brigade executed a textbook example of the true prompt attack. In the first phase of the attack, they advanced a bit south of Objective Juliet, then turned right along a tree line and attacked the Ukrainian battle position. After the attack has commenced, the Russians launched the second phase and executed a frontal assault against the already shaken Ukrainian battle position and captured it. The subsequent week brought a slight pause regarding major operations in this area. It is the effect of the ongoing Ukrainian offensive in the Kursk region, which we will talk about in another video. But here allow me to highlight that this Kursk offensive indeed had a slowing effect on the Russian operations in the Donbass. Exactly a week after the successful capture of Objective Juliet, the Russians shifted the balance to the perimeter of the tactical level area of influence of the previous operation. Albeit this week had no actual attacks, the Russians have thoroughly executed reconnaissance tasks and fire missions, thus maintaining the pressure on the Ukrainian defenses between Vuhledar and Konstantinivka. After a week spent like this, the Russians executed another textbook attack. Now they went for the obvious objective to capture a large part of difficultly defendable terrain between the Ukrainian 68th Separate Infantry Battalion and the 233rd Battalion of the 127th Territorial Defense Brigade. This area that I marked by Objective Romeo on the map, it was difficult to defend because the Russians have closed in on the southern and eastern flank. And furthermore, to defend this area, it was necessary to have a close coordination between the two already suffering Ukrainian units. During this tactical operation, capturing Objective Romeo, the Russians had a combined force ratio approximately 5-1. Therefore, after the first Russian maneuvers, the Ukrainians withdrew their forces behind the road. At the same time, in the last days of August, the Russians exploited their success on their left flank. Parallel with the attack on Objective Romeo, forces subordinate to the 29th Combined Arms Army, supposedly the 37th Motor Rifle Brigade or the 40th Marine Brigade, have launched an attack on the left flank. The green line represents the area of influence of the 68th Army Corps' previously described operations. If we carefully observe the map, we can see that at the perimeter of this area of influence, there is an important but vulnerable section of the front held by the 160th Territorial Defense Battalion of the 118th Brigade. The Russians intentionally exploited that in the Vuhledar operational area. All Ukrainian assaults were concentrated at the east to stop the attacks on Vuhledar. It resulted that when the Russians commenced the attack in the south, the depleted and overstretched units of the 160th Territorial Defense Battalion could not receive substantial support, neither artillery nor drones. The Russians coordinated the attack of two units. Approximately a company commenced a pincer movement from the east, and in close coordination with this maneuver, the 40th Marine Brigade executed the main attack from the south. It is interesting that according to the military common sense, the supporting attack should come from the front and the main blow should be executed as a pincer. But here the Russians had further improved the chaos by changing the roles of the two attack axes. While the Russians have reached the Brześciówka-Pawlivka line on the 27th of August, they tried to speed up the process. It was clear for them that the Ukrainian defense is at the brink of collapse in this area of operations. It was also clear that this balance-shifting method of attack proved to be effective. They continued to run small-scale recon by force maneuvers on their left, while they reconcentrated their forces to the right. And 4 or 5 days after capturing Objective Romeo, they commenced a powerful assault towards Vuhledar, marked as Objective Victor. Vuhledar and the surrounding mines are the key areas to capture if the Russians want to execute an attack that endangers both Konstantinivka and Vuhledar, thus further increase the chaos. It was even better for the Russians that these objectives are at the perimeter of the area of influence of the attack ran on the left flank by the 40th Marine Brigade, marked with the green line. Of course, it was not accidental. It was planned like this after thorough terrain analysis and reconnaissance. On the 1st and 2nd of September, the Russians executed an attack which perfectly fits into their balance-shifting method. But this attack was not on the operational but on the tactical level. First, the Russians ran a shaping operation, a small recon by force against mine number 1, marked as Objective Alpha, which resulted in very limited success. But it was good to draw the depleted fire support resources, I mean artillery and drones, of the 72nd Brigade and the 68th Battalion to this sector. On the next day, they launched an assault group of the 1472nd Motor Rifle Regiment, which, by the way, received the honorary title of Guards for previous heroic actions. The axis of attack was perfectly on the perimeter of the area of influence of the previous day's attack on Objective Alpha, marked just again with green lines. On the 2nd of September, they sent an assault platoon with 4 BMPs who captured the northeastern part of the village. By doing so, they could effectively adjust the artillery fire, softening the Ukrainian defenses in the next 4 days. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, after harsh but righteous criticism, the Russians could indeed improve their kill chain to have better coordination between their artillery and their maneuver forces. While on the 2nd of September, the shaping operations on Vuhledar were ongoing, the 40th Marine Brigade executed an attack that is one of the most brilliantly executed by the Russian armed forces since February 2022. It is more interesting if we consider the fact that this actual brigade was one of the units who got absolutely smashed here in February 2023 during the first major attempt to capture Vuhledar. At that time, the 40th Marine Brigade lost almost a battalion worth of casualties due to lack of coordination, poor reconnaissance, and bad leadership. After 1.5 years, this brigade has managed to seriously improve itself and wash its honors clean. On the 2nd of September, an assault platoon of the 40th Marine Brigade attacked from the east to the west towards Prachistivka. It has a significance in itself, therefore previous attacks parallel to the front line like this would be smashed by Ukrainian drones and anti-tank guided missiles. In contrast, now this attack has managed to advance 5 kilometers, penetrate the Ukrainian defenses, and capture a foothold in the perimeter of the village. By the result of this attack, the Russians had managed to have a crystal clear picture of the Ukrainian defenses in and around the village, which was crumbling. They decided to exploit the success of this shaping operation, and the 40th Marines launched a defensive operation, a frontal assault. This was executed by a whole mechanized infantry company. Successful attacks run by units this large are a rarity in the Donbass because of sensors saturating the battlefield. It clearly represents us the poor state of the Ukrainian defenses in this sector. The two Russian attack elements proved to be able to coordinate their fire and maneuver at a very high level, because while capturing Prachistivka, they attacked towards each other. Normally, in military training and according to Russian field manuals, the support by fire element and the maneuver element has to have a 90 to 45 degrees distance ideally. 180 degrees is to be avoided in order to prevent the soldiers shooting at each other. But in this case, it seems that these subunits of the 40th Marines had the proficiency to execute a difficult task like this. 5 days after the success of the 40th Marines on the left flank, and after 5 days of artillery preparations, and of course drones and airstrikes, the Russians launched their decisive operation in order to capture Vuhledar. The 139th Assault Brigade and the 1472nd Guards Motor Rifle Regiment launched an all-out coordinated assault against the depleted Ukrainian defenses. After heavy fighting, they managed to execute a pincer from the left and gain the foothold in the southern part of the village. And exactly after this moment, they launched the main thrust and captured Objective Victor with the frontal attack of a mechanized infantry assault company. The scheme of maneuver was exactly like already 2 times before. A shaping operation as a pincer from the flank, gain foothold, call for artillery, and launched the decisive operation from the front. By this time it was clear that the Ukrainian defenses are unable to effectively halt the Russian offensive. The Russians did not suffer tremendous losses, even if they deployed the whole company together, which was the recipe of disaster until this year's spring, now proved to be an effective method. This is clearly because of the lack of drones, artillery and troops at the Ukrainian side of this sector. It was the very last moment for the Ukrainian High Command to salvage the situation and send in significant reinforcements. But these reinforcements did not arrive. Only the 36th Separate Infantry Battalion appeared in the open sources as new unit in this area of operations. By this time, according to Ukrainian sources, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade and its adjacent units were at the 30% of their original strength. The Russians had the luxury to plan the operation and prepare their forces as long as 1 week. Of course, it was necessary, as an operational level offensive requires this. After the previous weeks, it was clear that they will stick to the good method and they will continue shifting their center of gravity as many times as necessary. The 5th Tatsinskaya Separate Guards Tank Brigade executed the main attack. This unit worth a word or two because this armored unit is a not that bad Russian unit. This brigade is participating in the Russian invasion since the first days. They fought at the western side of Kiev in late February and early March of 2022. However, they suffered tremendous losses and were plagued by the general incompetence of the Russian leadership of the attacking forces. They fought well and implemented bold and original ideas. Ever since, they were destroyed and rebuilt 2 or 3 times. However, it seems sooner or later they managed to implement the good practices of this war. This last sentence is also true regarding the whole Russian operational grouping participating in the capture of Vuhledar. The capability of organizational learning is a really important issue which I will address at the end of this video. All in all, the 5th Guard Tank Brigade, supported by the diversionary attacks of its adjacent units, launched a frontal attack at the eastern perimeter of Prechestivka through the Kashlahach Creek, thus concentrating all the available resources of the Ukrainian defenses into this sector. After breaking a huge gap into the Ukrainian defenses, on the 22nd of September they punched a left hook and deployed a battalion worth of forces, smashed the Ukrainian defenses, and reached the area marked with phase line Tango. To make matters worse, the 36th Motor Rifle Brigade, who until this time limited its actions only to small-scale recon by force missions, has launched an attack and reached the southeastern suburbs of Vuhledar. This section of the front did not see major actions since the disastrous Russian attack of February 2023, because it is the easiest to defend. The fact that the assault group of the 36th Motor Rifle Brigade were successful means that by this time, the 25th of September, the Ukrainian 72nd Brigade was defeated. We need to stop here for a moment. To defeat means to render a unit unable to execute its task. Simply that, no more, no less. Just to make the unit's task unachievable, of course usually by fire and maneuver. To destroy a unit means to cause casualties that this unit is lost its cohesion and the ability to continue organized resistance. And additionally, we consider a unit to be destroyed if it's lost the 50% of its combat power. In this actual situation, I consider the 72nd Brigade to be defeated, hence it could not fulfill its task to defend Vuhledar. And I could consider it to be destroyed, hence they had less than 30% of their original combat power. However, I do not consider them to be destroyed, because they proved to be able to fight a coordinated manner. However, other factors hampered it. By the 26th of September, the fate of Vuhledar was sealed. The 72nd Brigade was defeated and was on the brink of total destruction. The Ukrainian command had only one decision to make: order a breakout of the 72nd, or organize a limited offensive to release them and get them out from the encirclement. The logistic ties were effectively cut by the overwhelming superiority of the Russian drones and artillery, at least up until the hand-drawn red line marked by enemy artillery. Either choice to be made, both required a limited Ukrainian counterattack to be successfully executed. Option, or if you like, course of action 1, was the breakout: to push back the forward elements of the Russian 5th Guard Tank Brigade and at the same time suppress their artillery and draw their attention to the attacker for a duration of an afternoon. This attack of the extra Ukrainian brigade would open a narrow path to the 72nd to execute a fighting withdrawal from the town with its still combat-capable elements. And under one dreadful night, withdraw the larger part of the 72nd who are not combat-capable to the north of Bohoyavlenka and then send them back west of the river Dnipro for rest and refit. This course of action requires at least one, but rather two, well-led, well-trained and full-strength Ukrainian brigades, and what is equally important, requires the suppression of the artillery of the 4 Russian brigades south of Vuhledar. You could ask why not to try to suppress not just the brigade level, but the division level long-range artillery of the Russians, in order to support the breakout. It is because the brigade-level Russian artillery's task is to conduct fire missions to targets like those that this Ukrainian breakout would present them. Course of action 2 would be the release. The goal of this mission would have been to push back the Russians from the flanks of Vuhledar and to create a situation for the 72nd and another full-strength Ukrainian brigade to execute a relief-in-place task. This would have required the suppress of the Russian divisional-level artillery, which is an enormous task, and we haven't seen anything like that since the summer of 2023. This operation would require a coordinated attack of at least 2, but rather 3 Ukrainian brigades in order to roll up and push back the Russians to the Brzezinski-Pavlivka line and to recapture Vuhledar. This counteroffensive would require resources as big as the Ukrainians deployed in the Kursk region. Therefore, this course of action was just a theoretical option. In the reality, there was only one good course of action: to order the 72nd to execute the breakout while it is supported from the outside. In this actual operational situation, the Ukrainians did not have additional reserves at hand. Of course, the Ukrainian High Command could have thought about it earlier, in the middle of September, to send the reserve brigade to this area because it was certain that the Tavria operational grouping did not have enough forces to spare. But it did not happen. The adjacent units, the 36th Infantry Battalion and the 68th Separate Infantry Battalion, also had their hands full, so they could not help either. In this situation, the commander and staff of the Ukrainian Tavria operational grouping had to make a decision. They, and most importantly the commander, had to choose between bad and bad. It is a very common situation that a commander has only bad choices, but he still has to make the decision because a wrong decision is better than no decision. However, in this case, there were no decisions made. According to rumors and anecdotal intelligence, when the commander of the 72nd realized that they will not receive outside support, he gave the order to break out. The 72nd had its battalions at a strength of platoons. They had dozens of seriously wounded soldiers to be treated and evacuated. They had no artillery support, only a handful of drones. They only had less than a dozen armored vehicles left. All possible roads were cut by Russian artillery and drones. To make matters worse, the forward elements of the Russians' 5th Separate Guard Tank Brigade had a clear field of fire to the northern outskirts of the town. The 1st Echelon Battalion of the Russian 37th Motor Rifle Brigade had a foothold in the western blocks of the town, while the 36th Motor Rifle Brigade had the same situation at the eastern side. Therefore, all troop movements were noted and reported. In this situation, the commander of the 72nd knew that they have no time to spare. By this time, it was clear that the whole 72nd was not present inside the town. According to my deduction, based on what has happened, at least the platoon worth of forces, what once was a battalion, was outside of the encircled town. We don't even know what had really happened. We only have circumstantial evidence and deductions based on them. According to this circumstantial evidence, probably on the 27th, 28th, and 29th of September, the two elements of the 72nd Brigade tried to execute coordinated maneuvers. I mean, the outside element had launched very limited attacks in order to divert the attention of the Russians away from the element attempting the breakout. During these days, unknown number of Ukrainian troops could get out of the encirclement. But we know that in these 3 days, altogether less than a company worth of Ukrainian armored vehicles were spotted at the northern part of Vuhledar and the north of it, and at least 3 of them were destroyed, while causing about the same amount of casualties to the Russians. If I am forced to say a number, I assume that approximately 100 or 200 Ukrainian troops could get out of Vuhledar in these 3 days. Subsequently, something strange happened. The commander of the 72nd Brigade, Colonel Ivan Vinnik, was relieved from his duty. Of course, it is against all sound logic that the commander of a brigade in this desperate situation is to be removed. The only logical explanation of this was Colonel Winnick acted against standing orders. Based on this, the standing orders were to hold Vuhledar at all costs. According to rumors, this order was in effect because during Zelensky's visit to the West, it was considered to be disadvantageous to lose this strategically important town. As an ex-military commander myself, I can understand that bad and unpopular decisions has to be made sometimes. But I am also convinced that as a commander, the most important goal is to preserve my forces in order to continue to resist and fight another day. This not a step back order would have resulted the complete destruction of a once formidable unit and its precious manpower for absolutely no tactical or operational purposes. I strongly agree with Colonel Winnick's decision to commence the withdrawal against his orders. In the final days of September, there were no reasons to stay in Vuhledar further. Officially, the Russians captured Vuhledar on the 30th of September. However, according to video evidence, they got a full control of the town on the 1st of October. We don't know a lot about the real casualty figures. Of course, Russian propagandists are talking about 800 prisoners of war, which is funny if we consider that probable combat strength of the whole 72nd Brigade was under 800 men at the time of the breakout. However, we do have evidence that some Ukrainian soldiers, mainly seriously wounded, were left back to the mercy of the Russians. All in all, according to my research and deductions, the bulk of the 72nd could break out from Vuhledar. However, they had to leave behind all their equipment except small arms and tactical radios. Alright, to wrap up this video. What we see after the battle is that the 72nd Brigade received its new commander and they were present in this area of operations for at least another 2 weeks. I strongly suggest to the Ukrainian General Staff to withdraw the 72nd to the western part of the country and after a good rest start rebuilding them based on the still existing experienced core of the brigade. After the battle, Russian commentators expected to speed up the offensive, hence they have captured a strong enemy bastion, and it proved that they can execute armored charges on the steppe. However, the Russians limited their offensive at the same tempo like before capturing Vuhledar. It is still a considerable tempo. They are gaining land as fast as they did at the time of their Popasna breakthrough in May and June 2022. For me, it means that the Russians are well aware of the limitations of their own capabilities. They hold their armored and mechanized forces on a shorter leash. This leash is as short or as long as they can support their forces with artillery and with decision making. Currently, this level is at the companies or assault groups. They have a functioning method of attack, and after a long implementation period, the whole armed forces of Russian Federation is capable of fighting accordingly. However, I strongly suggest to the armed forces of Ukraine to draw the lessons. I am sure that they have more accurate information than I have, thus they can create a more accurate analysis. It is a must to send a bulletin or a memo, if you like, to all Ukrainian brigades and battalion staffs and all operational grouping staffs. In this bulletin, there will be the telltale signs that the Russians are preparing an offensive like this. And of course, there will be suggestions how to react, how to reroute logistics, regroup reserves, strengthen battle positions, and so on. This change of defensive doctrine, albeit not spectacular and hard to sell to the mainstream media, but can have a tremendously positive effect on the combat capacities of the armed forces of Ukraine. And last but not least, the strategic level indecisiveness that we could observe during this battle must be instantly eliminated. Because if the troops at the tactical level commanders have the feeling that the strategic level can and will abandon them in the time of crisis, it can cause more serious destruction than the Russian glide bombs. This indecisiveness plagues not just the armed forces of Ukraine, but also the Western militaries, politicians, and even the corporate sector. However, it is a very different topic. All in all, thank you for watching. If you think my job worth it, please like and subscribe, and if you have something to add, I am more than happy to see it in the comments. Thank you and see you soon.